For this podcast, we're going to be talking over the so-called Russian election interference case gone over by the Mueller special counsel investigation. And if you see here, we're looking at William Binney, and people have been quick to announce him as some conspiracy theorist, but let's look at actually his real credentials. He is a former NSA technical director, and which is an extremely high position in the agency, and he's a whistleblower on the agency for what they have been doing against civil liberties. And if you look at him, he has never lied to Congress. Now you compare him next to what they got their intelligence for this so-called Russian election interference from. One of the major people they got it from, where they said it was likely, was actually from the NSA director at the time, Clapper. Now, Clapper, if you should note, he actually lied to Congress about the collection of data about millions of Americans' phone data. Now, he had this question not only at the time, but actually in advance. He was given this question in advance deliberately, so he would actually had the option of stating that's classified information and I cannot give it in this setting. Now, he could have given that answer, but he actually stated no, not wittingly, which means that he actually lied to Congress, knowing that that answer right there was a lie. Then he actually had the opportunity after that point to correct his answers. He actually refused to and stated that his answers were correct and up to date. Now, it was not up until the point later that the Snowden leaks actually proved that he was lying, that the American public knew he was lying. Now, the actual person asking the question knew his answer was a lie, and that's why the specific answer was of the question, and they wanted to catch him in a lie. Either a lie or for him to actually state that he cannot state it in that public setting. And that's why we get to this point here. Now, do we want to actually trust the point of that, or do we want to trust that from someone who has never lied to Congress? Now, people also bring up another person, which is CIA Director Clapper. We've also had information come back that he, again, has lied to Congress as well. On his information, he has actually not only lied to Congress, he has actually wiretapped Congress on top of that. That this man's actually wiretapped Congress because he didn't trust Congress themselves, which is actually a felony offense. You cannot do that. And on top of this, then we look at another person that we've actually seen that would make actually the third person. When they say 17 agencies came together and came to a conclusion, it was actually only 3 people. This would be the third person, and this would be James Comey. This is the third person that would come together and actually state it. It was amongst it was people below these 3 that actually were pretty much meant to write up these reports to make it look like 17 agencies, but it was not 17 agencies. It was just 3 people coming to a conclusion. And the third person was James Comey. James Comey has again been proven that he lied to Congress as well. Are we going to trust 3 people who lied to Congress? Or are we going to trust a person who's never lied to Congress as actually a whistleblower who's actually a high position and actually blew the whistle on actually the NSA for their violations of civil liberties, for actually initially starting these programs that were essentially what Snowden eventually leaked. And he essentially blew the whistle at an early point of what was happening. and that these people were actually violating codes of conduct and were spying on people like their former girlfriends and such, and he was actually stating this fact back then. And he isn't some type of conspiracy theorist. He's actually a legitimate whistleblower. It's just where his abilities for him to go on TV have been limited, that he's had to go on independent outlets. And that's the whole point, that nobody else wants to listen to him because the mainstream media has done a blacklist on him because of where he's coming from. They don't want to hear that the NSA is essentially unconstitutional. And really, when we see civilian intelligence really is not even necessary, as we will probably get into it later down the road, because they don't take an oath to the Constitution, they take an oath to secrecy. And those who take an oath to the Constitution are usually the odd men out and usually face severe consequences for their actions. Now, what we'll hear from him is basically he will actually prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that actually Russia could not, with any certainty, have hacked the actual database of the DNC because of the actual limitations at the time, and he'll actually prove that to you if you listen here.
Yeah, well, I mean, the claim that Russia hacked into the DNC and got data and gave it to WikiLeaks has been a fraud from the very beginning. I mean, we tried to find evidence of it as the Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, and the evidence that came out about Guccifer 2 and that data was clearly a local download. It wasn't a transfer across the network. We even tried to transfer the data at the rate it came down. It came down at basically 38 megabytes per second was the highest speed. The best we could do in transfer rates from the United States to Europe was from a data center in New Jersey to a data center in the UK, and we got 12 megabytes per second. That was with service and data that has to go with the packets and all. The data rate of 38 megabytes per second was roughly just data. So if it was going across the network, you'd have to almost double it to hold all the housekeeping information that has to go with it, so they can monitor it and trace it and things like that. So I mean, it was just impossible to get that rate out of it. So the rate that was published by Guccifer 2 on the 5 July data transferred out of the DNC could never be transferred across the network. And we tried it, and the further we went east into Bulgaria and Albania and things like that, the capacity just got less and less. So the best we were able to do was data centers from New Jersey to the UK, and that was 12 megabytes per second, roughly one-fourth the capacity just for the data, and probably 1/8 to handle all the housekeeping and the data. So we'd have to have something 8 times that capacity, something like a dedicated gigabit line to handle it, and that the service providers don't give to anybody. Well, I mean, the idea that they claim the 17 intelligence agencies, that included the DNI as one of them, that they all agreed that it was a hack by the Russians. I mean, that's absurd. I mean, there's only one agency there that could actually verify it, and that was NSA. The rest of them are irrelevant to that. They don't have the capacity that NSA does to monitor and own the entire network worldwide, which they do. FBI doesn't. They depend on NSA to go get the data, and they investigate the data that NSA collects. Us. CIA does the same thing, and the other agencies also, since Obama basically opened up the gates of NSA data to all the other intelligence agencies, that only added thousands of more people that could look at the data, which meant if there was a leak of any of that information, it would mean thousands of more people would have to be investigated. So that was all a farce too. It was like to cover up the built-in spy network put in place to go against the Trump administration. That's what that was all about. Yeah, of course, all those big commercial Silicon Valley companies all have to kowtow to the government because the FCC regulates everything they do. If the FCC wants to, they can put them out of business quickly. So, I mean, that's the problem. The other problem is that in their cooperation, they thought they were cooperating with the government, giving them under a PRISM program information to NSA when they requested. What they didn't really understand is, so NSA wanted all of their data. So under the muscular program, they tapped their data links between the data centers that they had and took everything that they transferred when they backed up everything. So when they go through the backup, NSA got all of their data, not just the parts that they requested. In fact, the PRISM program in 702, the thing that's coming up now, is a sham. I mean, it's a fake program that's simply put out there for everybody to look at and say that see, we're really abiding by the law and only requesting data that's relevant, when in fact in the background with the muscular program, also with the upstream program, which is the fiber optic taps in the U.S. and around the world, that's the the Fairview program, Stormbrew, Blarney, and other third-party companies and governments that are participating, as well as GCHQ and the second party. So all of that data is being collected and stored. That's why they're building another 2.8 million square foot facility on Fort Meade for the storage of data. In other words, the Utah facility, a 1 million square foot facility, is going to be full here very soon, a few more years, and it'll be full, so they need a place to put it, so they need to build a bigger one. Why? Because they're collecting more and more data every year. So they're all lying to you, the U.S. public, trying to keep them uninformed and uneducated so they won't object. Yeah, well, it certainly is threatening their business model. I think they're losing billions because of the reaction in Europe and other places around the world against what they're doing. I mean, the European Union has just passed the GDPR, their privacy laws, and it's basically coming out saying the data that their laws basically say the people who own the data are the people whose data it is. So anything about those people, they own it. And if they're going to transfer it to anybody else, they have to get the approval of the people to do that transfer. If they don't, it's a violation of their laws. And so all these companies now, and they're also talking about the U.S. not being a safe harbor, because when they transfer data to the U.S. and back it up over there by these companies, they're susceptible to U.S. law saying, give us all this data. So it's a question of violation of laws that exist in Europe from companies that operate both in Europe and in the U.S. So they're going to have real problems with that. First Amendment of the Constitution was written so that people had the right to free speech and also be able to hear many different views. Now, whether or not they associate with a view or like a view or support it, that's another issue. But they have the right to hear it. That's the whole point. And also that it says the press is supposed to tell us the truth. And they're not doing that either. So they're not living up to their responsibility under the First Amendment of the Constitution, nor is the government. So it's a straightforward violation of constitutional rights. Just to keep, the objective here is to keep the American public uninformed so they can just go buy products and not pay attention to what the government's doing and just stay out of it. The public business is not their interest. That's what the government view is. We'll take care of you. You don't need to know anything. You just take what we say for gospel truth, and just believe us. Well, I mean, that's part of it, but as you're starting to find out, there's much more behind this than just a lost election. There's all the scandals of fraud and bribery and so on and payoff and so on with the Democrats, and a lot of other crimes that were committed in terms of violations of the other constitutional amendments, like the 4th, 5th, and 6th of U.S. citizens, as well as the citizens around the world, since they share this information through the FBI and the Drug Enforcement Administration with other parallel policing organizations around the world. And they don't give them the data because it came from NSA and that bulk collection of data in the world. So it's a clear violation of the constitutional rights of basically most of the democracies in the world. So they want to cover this all up, and they don't want to address it. And so you create a separate diversion. So it's like the Wizard of Oz. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain, except we're trying to be little Totos going over and pulling the curtain back. It is. In fact, most of us in the VIPs and others that we know, whistleblowers, are saying this is the greatest threat to our constitutional form of government since our Civil War. And it's not just us, it's all the other democracies, because they're all following us too. Well, I mean, that's basically absurd. I mean, if they don't believe that the American public under the First Amendment couldn't listen to any kind of view, I mean, that's what they're trying to do here also in universities, shutting down conservative views, only liberal views. There's this move against the First Amendment, giving people the right to hear all kinds of perspectives. That's simply a violation of everything, all the founding principles of this nation. That's because of all the criminal people we have in our government. I mean, I've been calling them criminals for a long time because they all agreed to violate our constitutional rights. That's the founding principles of what our nation's supposed to be all about. And they've all agreed to that. They're all kowtowing to it and letting it continue because of this deep state shadow government that's involved that has all this money and population control about it. I mean, it started originally in NSA because they wanted to get more money to build a budget and a bigger empire. And then it also was agreed to by the White House, George W. Bush and Dick Cheney, because it gave them power to look into all their political opponents. Once they started this bulk collection, they could do that. And Obama continued that. You're looking at, we're using the IRS against the Tea Party, and the Occupy group was looked at by the police. And any number of other people were used, it was used against them in a court of law, and they never even knew it. So they couldn't challenge discovery of their data used against them in the court because under the Sixth Amendment, they're allowed and guaranteed due process. And they didn't get it. And then that was lied to by the Supreme Court under the challenge to that, what they were doing under Amnesty International versus Clapper. That case made it to the Supreme Court, and the Solicitor General lied to that Supreme Court because of that, because he wanted to keep it out of the Supreme Court and get it, because if it was ruled unconstitutional, their entire empire falls. They would have to stop. So that was simply and also reflect back on the FBI, what they were doing, what the Drug Enforcement Administration was doing about parallel constructions, that is manufacturing the data separate from the NSA collected data, which is what they used to arrest people, and they substitute that in the court of law. It's called perjury, you know. So I mean, this is there's so many people involved and so many agencies. They all have to cover it up, or they all fall. It's unfounded allegations. That's all they're doing. Humanity has always relived history. They never learn. When in fact, when you look back, it's very simple. All you have to do is go with facts. Produce a fact. And if you don't have a fact, you don't have an allegation. That's very simple. And they don't have facts, and if they're going to make those allegations, where's the fact?
And if you see right there, you'll see that that his basic argument is always basically he wants facts. And he's the one who has actually provided facts, as he gave download speeds. He was giving download speeds with his arguments, which is actually a lot different than what the opposition is. Their whole opposition is basically making wild accusations without actually having any legitimate evidence. They just basically make some wild, harebrained accusation against Russia, having no actual legitimate evidence, and they expect people to believe it because they're intelligence. Meanwhile, they don't have the actual evidence of anything happening. This is the whole point. They've never had one bit of evidence, and that's where that's where the whole thing is coming from. When we look at it, he proves that basically that due to download speeds, it could not have come anywhere but domestically. And he's even made other statements before that it's the exact same speed as what a thumb drive would be. Now this is actually quite unique because many whistleblowers that have been doing it before, when they want to actually remove data from one site that they're actually angry with, they actually use a thumb drive in modern times to actually remove the data because it's a very quick way to handle it. And ironically enough, at that same time, the actual speed exactly mimics that same speed number of download, and that would have actually been identical. And that's where we get those same points. And this is why that's a key point to make, that a lot of people are not paying attention to. Now the fact is where we're at is the Mueller investigation has refused on countless times to interviewing William Binney, even when William Binney has offered. There's even been hackers such as Kim.com who've offered the same information, and and Mueller has refused. Now this could be for the fact that Mueller is actually tied in with the Uranium One deal. This is one thing that a lot of people don't want to look at. The Uranium One deal was essentially where two people brought uranium samples over to Russian officials, and that's where those two officials would be Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and FBI Director at the time, Robert Mueller. And those would be the two people that would be implicated. Now, having uranium samples leave the country, or any amount of uranium leave the country without being signed off on as an actual sale with an actual full signing off, which means what they actually did after the sale, not before the sale, not what they did at the actual point of giving samples. So the point of giving samples would have actually been under penalty of law. The penalty of law would have actually been labeled as either A, espionage at the lightest bit, or B, it would have been labeled as treason. This would explain why we're seeing such a one-sided investigation to begin with, because we see the links between the Democrats and Russia on several occasions. We've even seen the way the formation of the team has been put together. It's been completely one-sided toward the Democrats, and this could easily be formed in such a way that it is basically to cover his backside. Because if we look into a Uranium One investigation, if Hillary Clinton goes down, she's either A, going to take Mueller down with him, or Mueller is going to go down naturally through the actual process of the investigation itself. And that's where we're at. And they know that. So basically what the idea is, create a diversion. The diversion is this hoax of an investigation into Trump, which there is no actual evidence. When you look at the thing with Manafort, it was basically, okay, he was working unregistered with Ukraine as a lobbyist, but so were the Podesta brothers, specifically Tony Podesta. Now, Tony Podesta was basically given immunity. He doesn't even have to testify for his immunity. Now, what we're seeing here is we're seeing basically, and we're seeing what is linked with the Podesta brothers. Well, you have the Podesta brothers were linked with Hillary Clinton's campaign. And this links back to the whole same thing. Is it keeps linking back to where basically you're seeing one side prosecuted and one side not. Basically, it's basically set up to basically when Mueller's saying, oh, we're not out to get Trump, but he's definitely stating that he's out to get Trump because he knows if he gets, he wants to basically get Trump or make Trump non-functional. That's the whole idea of trying to establish why they wanted Rosenstein to have more power in the Justice Department, because it ensured that any possibility of a Justice Department going after the Uranium One scandal was dead. And that's where we see this. The whole idea of this was to essentially create a diversion. This whole thing is basically because essentially what they did was, what we found in the emails was that basically is that the Clinton campaign tried to buy off media to rig the campaign and to rig the election. Well, this whole idea is to essentially state that, oh no, it's Trump who is trying to throw the election through Russia. Well, Russia had no links to the to any of the campaign, nor to any of the effects on the campaign, as we see. When it comes to actually social media advertisements, it was virtually nothing. Percentage-wise, the percentage was so low, it was insignificant when it comes down to the actual numbers of the actual probability that they actually had any impact. When it comes down to their actual reporting, It was slim to none. It was based on the way she conducted her campaign. You look at her, what she made statements. It goes down to her foreign policy statements. She was basically stating that because WikiLeaks had her emails, she was willing to launch war on Russia, Iran, and North Korea, as well as potentially China, even though she had a cozy relationship with certain people in China and Russia. And we know that she has cozy relationships with people in Saudi Arabia and Israel. And this is the whole point, that basically she was willing to launch essentially World War III just because someone had some emails without any evidence. Now, Trump stated that would be an irrational statement, and that launching World War III is irrational. The media jumped on stating that, he must be working with the Russians. No, that's basically all his statements were. We're not going to act irrationally. They automatically assumed just because he made certain irrational statements before that he must have to make an irrational statement. Well, just because he wasn't making an irrational statement there does not mean he's always going to make an irrational statement. He's made certain irrational statements, yes, in the past, but not all of his statements are going to be irrational, and that's the whole point. And that's where things need to be understood. And that's why there was the whole idea of the Russian hacker theory is completely fabricated, and that's where it all comes from. Because they've never looked at the actual server itself. They allowed a third party hired by the DNC to look at that. That means that there was no actual investigation on the DNC's server. This means the actual investigation is a fraud. Number two is, when it comes down to it, they've never investigated, they've never interviewed people when it comes down to somebody that's going to actually know something about the download speed. They would actually know about what would it take for Russians to download that information remotely, and how close they would have to be to actually get that information. And they proved that they would actually have to be within the United States and actually very close to that location to get that download speed. If not, and it actually proved that they probably had to be right there in the building, because that speed is actually showing what an actual flash drive is, because of the actual speed that they were actually getting. Then when it comes down to it, is we find that the way they've handled this, that we've gone over 2 years, not one piece of actual information proves anything. That should make you very, very skeptical of this. Basically, the reason why Roger Stone was arrested was because of the fact is they had this whole idea of a profile. He didn't fit the profile, so they're arresting him for basically not matching up. That's really it. And because his statements were a little bit inconsistent. Now, basically, it's not hard to basically have a slightly inconsistent statement with the FBI. That happens for a lot of people, and it's very easy. And the FBI has been, with this whole thing, has been overzealous with the way they've been handling this thing. You could lie about what you had for breakfast, and the FBI is going to arrest you. If you said you had oatmeal when you really had some fruit, they'll arrest you. And that's what they will do. They're not going to be nice when it comes to those things. Now, when it comes down to the actual reality, is they shouldn't be doing these things. They should only be doing on actual concrete things. This is why we need to eliminate all of these civilian intelligence agencies. They have no purpose. They're not even constitutionally lawful. And that's why we're seeing these whole things with this whole BS investigation. If they're going to make a serious investigation, close it off when you have no evidence. And if you're looking for some type of evidence of collusion with another country, look at all countries, and look at all parties. You had Bernie Sanders colluding with the Labour Party in Australia. You've had Hillary Clinton. We've had video, her campaign colluding with Democrats in Canada. We had her also receiving money from other countries such as Saudi Arabia, Israel, and even there was somebody who went to jail from China who was illegally funneling money to her. Even Russia. So if you want that the Russia conspiracy, you have it right there. And this is what was going to her campaign. Both her campaign and Bernie Sanders' campaign violated FEC rules. And this is where we're looking at. Now, when it comes down to his campaign, he did not receive foreign money. And he did not receive any foreign help. And that was the whole point. And this is where we get the whole thing. The only things we've come up with are really these insane conspiracy theories that make no sense. And if you like this, like, subscribe, and I will see you later today, and share this all the way around social media, and we will go on with our other major news and posts for the and podcast for the day. That's it. Bye.